Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Iain.
And so am I.
I read a lot of comics.
And I don't.
So each episode I set Iain the task of reading one comic that has, at least in part, made the jump from page to screen. We then discuss both the film and the comic and record the results in the hopes that it might entertain your ear holes. Whether that's the case or not, we invite you, dear listener, to join us, whatever your experience. This episode we will be discussing The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's second Batman film. Released in 2008, the movie boasts a tour de force performance from Heath Ledger as the Joker, for which he posthumously won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. So of course, I've chosen to focus on the other villain of the film, and set Iain the task of reading Batman The Long Halloween. Published over 13 issues between 1996 and 1997, the comic is a retelling of Batman's early years working with Commissioner Gordon and a pre-Two-Face Harvey Dent to catch an elusive killer. As a side note, the upcoming reboot of The Batman starring Robert Pattinson appears, at least from the trailer, to be taking some inspiration from this run too. Now, talking about comics is very much what we do here at Become the Teapot, so we don't usually worry about this, but whilst this is a superhero comic, the story is in essence a mystery. So, we are going to issue our first ever spoiler warning. If you haven't read the story and think that you might want to, then pause it here and then come back and join us when you're done. If you've read the comic or aren't worried about spoilers, then let's start, as always, with the film. Iain, what do you think of The Dark Knight?
Well, yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. It's the first time in a long time that I've watched this film purely on its own, rather than all three of them, or at least preceding Batman Begins.
Yeah, I've got to say, I left it a bit late to watch the film in the end. Yeah, actually I did it at about 11 o'clock last night I started watching it. But Haley and I were going to watch Batman Begins and then The Dark Knight to go through. But yeah, as I say, I was too busy playing games.
Well, we can't really talk about this film without commenting on Heath Ledger's Joker.
Yeah, I kind of thought it would be funny to see how far we could go in the podcast without talking about him, considering that, you know, so much of the conversation around this film is around Heath Ledger's performance. You can't speak about this film without speaking about his performance. It is an excellent performance. It's obviously notable for being one of his last. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that's already been said about that, and, you know, there's not much more that we're going to add to the conversation about the Joker that hasn't already been said.
I mean, the main focus of this is Two-Face.
Yeah, the story in the comics that we're focusing on, obviously, predominantly, follows Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and Harvey Dent. Yeah. They're the three main stories, and they feature heavily throughout this film as well.
But yeah, talking about those three, there is a lot of comparisons regarding the comic book into the film. I know a fair few people that didn't realise that this film was inspired by The Long Halloween.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. There's nothing wrong with this. Most people who watch films in the cinema, you know, go to see superhero films, they're billion-dollar movies. And, you know, it's understandable that most people haven't read or don't know about these things. I wanted to ask, what is your familiarity with Batman as a character?
Well, as a character, I know him from the films, going from Tim Burton all the way up to Joel Schumacher.
Joel?
What did I say? Joe. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Joel Schumacher with that fantastic film, Batman and Robin. Yeah, I mean, so I'd seen the films, hadn't watched the animated series. I mean, that's about it, really. I've not read that many comics.
Yeah, that's fair. I think with a character like Batman and with Superman to a lesser extent, Spider-Man as well, is they are so much in the forefront of, you know, mainstream comic book knowledge. A lot of people will know a lot about him as a character, but haven't actually read that many comic books.
There's only a handful of comics from DC that I've read.
So yeah, one thing I did notice, the character of Gotham City is not as prevalent in The Dark Knight as it is in Batman Begins. Christopher Nolan has said he used a lot more CGI in Batman Begins to make the city of Gotham seem more like its own thing. You know, you've got the Narrows, you've got all these other areas. In this, it might as well have been set in Chicago. Yeah. And that one weird bit where they went to Hong Kong. I get why he's doing it. I get he wanted to ground it in a more recognisable setting, but I preferred that style from the first one where you did have a character to the city that was distinct from, you know, your average American city. Yeah,
I mean, even going back to the Joel Schumacher films, obviously it's a very bright, coloured town.
Yeah. I mean, it was very much inspired by Tim Burton's aesthetic that he established with the first two Batman films, but then put through some sort of
Snapchat filter.
Yeah, that's a great, absolutely. You know, not a good one. Whereas in this film, it is Chicago. And even the absence of Wayne Manor, because obviously it burned down in the last film, is a major setting in Batman mythology, the cave underneath, and all of it is absent from this. You know, at the end of the day, this is a comic book film. And I think too often people describe this as realistic, and it's not realistic. It's grounded, but it's not realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I can see this Batman in real life. Yeah, he's not too overpowered. He is just a human in a suit. So I guess those aspects of it are realistic.
Yeah, I mean, but there are elements in this film that are completely beyond the realms of realism, and I think people get a bit too hung up on that.
Yeah. What was it in particular that you liked about this film?
Well, I think I'm a fan of Christopher Nolan. I don't know about what your thoughts are on Christopher Nolan.
I've seen most of his stuff. I don't think I've seen that space one.
Interstellar?
That's the one.
Yeah.
I've not seen that. I've not seen his new one.
Tenet.
Thank you.
Not many people have. There's other things going on. I mean, I'm a big fan. Insomnia, Memento, my favourite is The Prestige. And obviously when he made a Batman film, that was exciting as a comic book fan and a Christopher Nolan fan. And I think he's obviously a fan of action films, but he ties it to something else. I mean, this film is heavily reminiscent, and I think Christopher Nolan's talked about it as an inspiration in the past, of Heat.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen Heat?
Don't think I have.
I won't talk about it too much then, but yeah, it's Heat, but with these extra levels of fancifulness. What is it about the film in particular that you enjoyed then, as someone who's seen a couple of Christopher Nolan films, has read a couple of the comics, but from that perspective, what is it about the film in particular?
I enjoy Batman and Gordon's relationship.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you also see the evolution of Gordon going from lieutenant, I think it is, to commissioner.
And Gary Oldman is great, isn't he, in this?
Oh yeah.
He especially towards the end of this film, he really carries an emotional weight to the film. When you see a good man becoming unraveled, when he's sort of shouting at Batman about having to save Harvey Dent, you can see that he's on the edge, and then obviously subsequently with his family. I think it's not as flashy as a performance as, say, Heath Ledger's, but I think it really does some heavy lifting in this film, where you've got Christian Bale doing, gravelly angry voice and all these ludicrous things. Having a grounded person like that adding some emotional nuance to things really helps.
Yeah, I mean, I also do like things being foreshadowed. Just for example, when Harvey meets Alfred for the first time at the gala, and they're talking about Rachel, and Harvey says to Alfred, "You've known her whole life," to which he's like, "No, not yet, sir."
Yeah, there's a little foreshadowing. Yeah, I mean, what do you think about Rachel as a character and her fate in this film
and her recasting?
Well, there's that as well. Yeah,
I didn't even realise that. Like, I knew that she had been recast.
Yeah, didn't
affect it in any way.
I would say Maggie Gyllenhaal is a better actor, but I mean, she's not given a huge amount to do in this film, and then she's ultimately. Do you know the term fridged?
You mean the thing that I put beers in?
No. So in comic book terms, there is a website called Women in Refrigerators, and it's about a female character being killed off in order to advance an emotional state within a male protagonist. It's a bit of a trope within comic books of female love interests being killed in order to provide some emotional heft to the male protagonist. It's an interesting trope. When you start noticing it, it becomes something you pick up on with sort of alarming regularity.
Well, yeah, I mean, now you said that, I can think of examples in my head of certain films that's happened to. It's not something that I've actually picked up on, but I can see this across a lot of other films now. Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, her death isn't entirely to motivate Batman as a protagonist. It is also there as a culminating factor in Harvey Dent's transition into Two-Face. So it's done for plot reasons as well, but I think it's a bit of a shame they did rely on that.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Harvey and Rachel, something that I did see, but when Harvey and Rachel are having a meal and Bruce walks in with that girl from the ballet.
Yeah, the Russian ballet.
He says, "Oh, shall we pull up a couple of tables?" And then in the next shot, they're all sat around the same tiny table. With Christopher Nolan being such a perfectionist, I thought he would have shown two tables together in the next scene.
I don't know how much of a perfectionist Christopher Nolan actually is. It's one of these strange things where I noticed in a lot of his films he has these sort of dodgy extras delivering lines quite badly. I mean, in this film there's a couple of examples where there's like the press conference where there's every character in that scene delivers their line by pointing and saying "No more dead cops" really badly. And when they're arresting all those gangsters, there's a cop who's like he puts someone in the car, pushes his head down and says, "Have a nice trip, see you next fall." It's like, that line doesn't apply here. That man has not fallen over. That's the whole point of that line. It just doesn't apply in that scenario.
Talking about Christopher Nolan and how much he does pay attention, when Bruce goes to Hong Kong, he does set timers for 2 minutes to 30 seconds.
All right.
And it's actually the exact time when it blows up.
Well, if you've not seen Tenet yet, but
No.
there's a section in that, because it plays with time a lot, the film. There's a section in that which is exactly timed to the time that in which it's meant to be taking place.
Films that do show real time, I do enjoy.
So you've said a bit about what you liked about the film. What didn't you like so much? Because I know I've said a couple. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, you've already touched on it. There's the gravelly voice. I understand why it's there, but it does put me off a little bit. I mean, in the later films with
Ben Affleck.
Yep. He's got the voice.
Yeah, like a modulator type
Thank you.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, so that to me makes more sense. But you would think in one of these films, Fox would go, here, have this.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't mind it too much, but I watched this last night with Hayley, and yeah, she was chuckling pretty much at every single line that Batman says, you know, especially at the beginning where he's like, I'm not wearing hockey pads. It's just that. So what?
What are hockey pants?
Hockey pads.
Pads. I thought it was pants.
Well, this is another thing, going back to my granddad days of IMDb. I mean, the Dark Knight boards were a mess back in the day. They were just an influx of memes. And yeah, hockey pants were a regular, one of the regular in-jokes was the I'm not wearing hockey pants.
So he does say pads.
He said pads. Yeah,
pads.
He says pads. And those boards were a mess in general.
One other thing that I didn't really like is how they killed off Two-Face.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because it spends, you know, a good 2/3 of the film sort of creating him, and then he really only has about 10 minutes of action.
Yeah, I would have liked to see him come back, especially that there was The Dark Knight Rises. I would have seen, like, not so much being the main villain, but at least to still have him there, as in to show continuity.
He could have made a decision, kind of like how Scarecrow does in all three of the films.
Exactly.
I think he's actually a really interesting part of the film. I think that idea that Joker's plan is to prove that anyone can have a bad day. This is taken from another comic book called The Killing Joke, which again is used as the foundation of some other films. So we'll use that at a later episode perhaps. But that sort of element which he's trying to do to Gordon in the comic,
yeah,
he proves in this film that anyone can have a bad day and it will ultimately make them just like Joker, just like Batman. I mean, that's Joker's central ethos in this film. However, I do like actually that he's proven wrong at the end. You know, and the boat scenario is a bit ridiculous when you think about it. You know, the two boats with the explosives on. It's a bit ludicrous, but I liked that they proved him wrong. I like that ultimately it proved that, you know, people wouldn't just devour each other or whatever he says, you know, wouldn't just rely on killing each other. I mean, some people talked about that and said that they think that, you know, someone should have blown it up, or that someone should have pressed the detonator and it would have blown up their own boat, and that would have been the twist. I don't think that works nearly as well. The whole point is that Batman is proved right and Joker is not. I mean, what are your thoughts on the ending?
Yeah, I mean, that I never actually thought about that effectively they could have had their own bomb switch in their hands.
Yeah.
So effectively, I never thought of the fact that if they were going to press the switch, their boat would blow up. Yeah, I mean, as the Joker, and probably most people who watch this would think, well, the criminals will blow up the other people. But you realise that the criminals are more human than the term, like the normies.
Civilians?
Thank you. Because there's that one bit where the massive guy walks up to it, grabs the switch, and just chucks it out the window. But really carelessly, it bounces off the window.
Oh, yeah.
It could have exploded.
Yeah, they kind of made a point of it being a key that you had to turn, but if that got caught on something... I think the ending a little bit anticlimactic. Obviously, throws the Joker off the roof, catches him by the foot. I mean, it's slightly reminiscent of the 1989 Batman film, Tim Burton one, where he throws the Joker off the end at the end and doesn't catch him. That's the end of the Joker, which I think indicates that perhaps the writers of this knew a bit more about the Batman-Joker relationship than the creators of Batman 1989.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously the main ending then is back to Harvey Dent. Which obviously is the comic we're talking about. So what do you think about...
So I think, just commenting there about how the Joker plotline ends, I mean, I think if Christopher Nolan had hindsight, he would have effectively killed off the Joker and then left Harvey Dent alive.
Well, no, because actually the film was not complete when Heath Ledger died. And Christopher Nolan did talk about changing the film after the death to reflect that. He thought that would be a disservice to the performance to change the storyline based on real world events. So now he left it as was. I think actually that's probably the right move. I think it did then mean that you had to have a whole bunch of new villains for the sequel, which I think they probably would have brought out more than just the Scarecrow.
Yeah.
But yeah, because obviously the comic is so much based around Harvey Dent. Let's get back to him. What did you actually think of his transition from the White Knight of Gotham to Two-Face? Did you think it was believable? What were your thoughts on that performance?
Yeah, I think it worked really well. I think casting
Aaron Eckhart?
Yes, casting him as Two-Face was a great choice.
Mm-hmm.
He's not like a well-known actor. He's not like, Chris Evans. He's not Robert Downey Jr. And yeah, the films that I've seen him in, he is really good. So him to bring his portrayal of Harvey Dent and then into Two-Face, I thought works really well.
Yeah, he's got that sort of old school Hollywood look. He looks like a sort of Robert Redford leading man type. He's got the big square jaw, and I think that's what you need for that pre-transformation Harvey Dent. You need someone who looks like a Boy Scout, who looks like the kind of guy you would put on a political public campaign poster. And then the way they show his sort of the flashes of darkness to him before he even becomes Two-Face, when he's about to torture that prisoner, and he's placing the gun to his head. There's the elements of darkness there that were clearly there before any of this happened.
Yeah, and again, commenting on how this film was shot, that's a really good scene to see the shadow and how half his face is covered.
Yeah.
Sort of, again, foreshadowing.
Happens a lot in the comic as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the actual transformation from Harvey to Two-Face, it worked well within the story. So it's not the classic, he gets chucked acid in the face.
No, which is in the comic.
But this being a little bit more realistic, the fact that if you did chuck this in someone's face, it's not going to have a perfect line down the face, is it?
Yeah, no, that's true, I suppose.
This does work for me.
Although
the fact
things
that,
don't burn halfway down the middle either, and so kind of that doesn't really work either.
Well, I did like the fact that he was lying down on his side, so half his face was covered in oil. Yeah. So as soon as the explosion happens and he's caught by Batman, it makes sense to me that the oil side of the face would be more scarred up than the non-oil.
They did a fair old job of explaining it, yeah. Although I would say was Batman, that was the worst gift in the world he could have left, was here's the coin from your dead girlfriend's blown up building, and he pops it down on the tray next to him and disappears. It's the first thing Harvey sees when he wakes up. No wonder he went mad. What
gift would you prefer, that coin or a picture of Wolverine?
I mean, I think if he had woken up to a large picture of Batman, just a framed picture of Batman on the side there, he would have woken up and gone, "Oh, that's nice. He's been thinking of me. He's visited me." It would have been much better.
Before we move on to the comics, any sort of final observations?
Actually, yeah. This film was very much promoted through social media, through Easter egg, you bloody love it, Easter egg campaign with lots of little websites for, re-election of Harvey Dent and this and that, the other. And as such, there's people diving into these things massively. And so there were loads of theories, loads of fan theories around this. So there's a lot of villains appear in the comic, and there were theories in this that, first of all, that Thomas Schiff was the Mad Hatter. He is not. That is a different name.
Who's Thomas Schiff?
Thomas Schiff is the prisoner that Harvey Dent is torturing. Batman comes in and says, "Thomas Schiff, he's a paranoid schizophrenic."
The guy we literally just spoke about.
Yeah. So he's not the Mad Hat. And also Coleman Reese,
I think I know what you're going to
say. Coleman Reese is the man that that discovers that Batman is Batman and is about to sell him out. There was a lot of fan theory that he was the Riddler, because his name is Reese and he is a male, so his name is Mr. Reese. Mr. Reese. Tenuous at best. And yeah, I would just say that no, Mr. Reese is not the Riddler, and no, Mr. Schiff is not the Mad Hatter.
I mean, it would be quite funny if they make a fourth one, and he is.
It would prove me wrong. I mean, the actor there is, he's gone into a lot of other things, isn't he?
What, Mr. Reese?
No, the guy who plays Thomas Schiff.
Oh, he's in Inception, he's all sorts.
He goes on to be he's in Ant-Man films. He's part of Ant-Man's crew. He's the Russian guy.
He's not in Inception. I was thinking about Scarecrow.
That's a different. Cillian Murphy. He's also, I think he's going to be in the Suicide Squad. He plays Polka Dot Man.
He does.
So we're darting back and forth across the line between film and comic. Shall we move on to the comic book a little bit? You've already said that you hadn't read this comic before, that you weren't particularly familiar with Batman outside of the film side of things. But, I mean, did you know anything going into this comic book?
Not really, if I'm honest. Obviously, I know who Batman is.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't even heard of The Long Halloween.
Yeah, because it's quite a well-known title in terms of Batman stories. You know, it's one of the more well-known comic books. And it obviously is one that was paid inspiration to this. And as I said in the intro as well, it's one that they appear to be taking inspiration for the forthcoming The Batman with Robert Pattinson as well. From the trailer, it looks like they've got that side of things with, the killer and working with Gordon in the early days of Batman's career.
Well, yeah, so from what I can see from the trailers, it does seem to be like a who is the killer, which is the same sort of storyline of the comics.
Yeah. Which is something that was missing from this as a film, is that because they replaced the Holiday Killer with the Joker as the central force for why these three characters have to work together, you lose that mystery aspect to things.
Yeah, I mean, reading this for the first time, there was a couple questions sort of that came to mind as I was reading the first couple of issues.
Yeah.
You know, how old is this Batman? Would you say he's experienced? Who knows that Bruce is Batman? And what's the relationship like between sort of Jim and, not Bruce, but those are the questions that I ask myself as I read through the comics.
Yeah, and what sort of conclusion did you come to on that?
Well, to me, it does feel like he is experienced. You can tell this by the relationship that he has with Jim, and just the way that he sort of holds himself and the way that he talks. I feel like in the comics, it is an experienced older Batman.
This is actually set in the early days of Batman's career.
Right, okay.
Which is why there's a constant theme throughout the comic and throughout the film, actually, that carried over, of escalation. This idea that Batman has come around and has started fighting the mob, which is why you then have a growing amount of costumed villains as well to counteract the heroes. This is something that was mentioned in the film, is that, it used to be the police and the mob. And then Batman comes around and suddenly you have a load of freaks, essentially. And that is the idea, is that this is still in the early days of Batman's career. There is a comic called Batman Year 1. We could probably call this Batman Year 2 or 3. This is early days.
Yeah, so what I've taken from this is that it's not his sort of first comic. It's not his first run. It's not his first fight, his first...
No, he's already established as Batman. He's established, you've done the origin, what happens next?
I mean, possibly because I was expecting to see his backstory again. Because when you say he's experienced, then you don't need to explain his backstory. You don't need to show his parents dying. You don't need to show how he got the suit. All these things.
Yeah, but they still kind of do that. After he's poisoned by Scarecrow with the fear toxin, you still have those flashbacks when he's going through that delusion of remembering his parents' death. So they still do touch on the origin, but especially coming from a filmic perspective like you are, someone who is used to the cinematic Batmans, where they feel the need to tell his origin story in every single film, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, everyone knows the origin of Batman. His parents were killed and so he fights crime. It's not exactly complex. Whereas this, as I say, is an established Batman, and the tide of Gotham itself is changing from the mob to the costumed crazies.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of characters in this, as in characters from his rogues gallery.
Yeah, I mean, not including Two-Face, you have 8 different villains who appear. You've got Solomon Grundy, you've got the Joker, you've got Calendar Man, you've got Catwoman, Poison Ivy, Riddler, Scarecrow, and the Mad Hatter.
Yeah, quite a lot there. I mean, not all of them have, not screen time, page time.
This is actually something I've noticed about Jeph Loeb's comics. He does this a lot, and he what he does, he will use the big villains as almost a selling point for the comics. And it works really well here, because the theme of escalation is so prevalent. But when he's done it for a 3rd or 4th or 5th time, where all of your favourite villains will show up for exactly one issue and then disappear. With Batman, you have a familiarity with these characters, so you don't need to set up who they are. You can just drop them into the story and then pull them out, because they're so famous. With Red Hulk, and they're dropping in Doc Samson and, Wendigo, it doesn't work quite as well.
Well, people that would have read the whole book of Days of Future Past should know who Wendigo is.
It's true.
But yeah, The art style by Tim Sale, it's got a sort of film noir vibe to it.
Yeah.
And the ears on Batman's suit are so tall. They are huge. But yeah, in the first pages, we get the introduction of Carmine Falcone. And it almost has a sort of Godfather vibe to it.
Yeah, because obviously he doesn't appear in The Dark Knight, but he was in Batman Begins.
He is mentioned at the start in the court scene.
Yeah, because he was already written out of it when he was driven crazy by Scarecrow in the first film.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Tim Sale art is something that's interesting because, like you say, at times it can be quite realistic with that film noir feel to it, but it's quite a stylized art as well. You know, Batman at times can look so daunting and oppressive, and the spindliness of the Scarecrow, and then you've got the tiny little Mad Hatter next to him. There's a stylistic quality to it as well.
Yeah, it's got its own uniqueness too. And also, as a first-time reader, we mentioned this a few episodes ago, but with X-Men, each issue, they call back to, oh, this is so-and-so, this is his powers, blah, blah. This does it a little bit, but not too much. It's not over the top.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the way that it was published is as its own self-contained thing. It wasn't part of Detective Comics or Batman. And also it was, 16, 17 years later, so... yeah, we talked about some of those villains there. Most of those I'm sure you know. I'll pick up on a couple, though, just to see what your familiarity with those were. Solomon Grundy.
Yeah, I knew of him. Mainly, I'm going to say, well, because I tend to do this thing where I look up comics rather than read them.
Right, yeah.
So I know who he is. I also watched the full series of Gotham. He's in that. Little bit of change from the original story.
I mean, completely different character, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, apart from that, not that much. I know that, well, I assume that he came back from the dead.
He did, yeah.
But just talking about them very quickly, I do like that they finally finished off his little rhyme.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
throughout the entire book, he says Solomon Grundy born on a Monday.
Yeah.
And he just says that over and over again until he meets Two-Face.
Until Two-Face says the rest of the rhyme and sort of placates him, which, Two-Face can sort of get some power over him just by, saying the rest of his rhyme, which Batman should have thought about a long time ago.
Well, yeah, it doesn't... You don't have to be too smart to think of that.
And the other one is the other one that's not perhaps a main character is Calendar Man, and because of the nature of the story, which is about a holiday killer, someone who kills on holidays of the year, so Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, etc. They go and talk to a Batman villain called Calendar Man. How much do you know about him?
I'll be honest, not a lot. Yeah, I mean, I thought he could have potentially been Holiday. Some sort of, he breaks out of jail when he does it and he goes back in. I
mean, that's essentially why they go and talk to him, is because his MO was all about dates as well. As a bit of background information, he is a villain from the 50s, I want to say, and he had appeared a couple of times, but he wasn't particularly prevalent. And this is the story, really, that establishes him. This comic came out shortly after Silence of the Lambs, so you can see how he plays a Hannibal Lecter type role in this.
Yeah, that is something that I actually did comment on in my notes, is that he has got this sort of Hannibal Lecter character-esque.
Yeah. Actually, it was only on my most recent read-through that I realised how early Calendar Man figures out who the killer is. I think Calendar Man knew the whole time. But yeah, so my question is, did you figure it out? Did you know who the killer was?
Well, considering that you've put a spoiler warning up top, I mean, I didn't expect the ending. The fact that there is two killers almost.
And that's my point, actually, about Calendar Man. From his first introduction, says he, she a lot.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't say as in like he or she. So at that point, you realise that Calendar Man has actually worked out that there are two killers and one is a male and one is a female.
You are correct. I didn't realise that. Him saying he, she, to me, was the fact that it was like, it could be a he, it could be a she.
But it's so consistent and no one else does it.
The final couple of pages, when you see who is the other killer, it did take me by surprise.
Yeah, I mean, even the reveal of, obviously, the first killer being Albert Falcone, who is supposedly killed off in the third issue of the comic. So I would understand if you didn't expect it, especially as he's a lesser-known character. But I think that's what this comic does well, is establishing all these other characters, especially these characters within the mob, the old-school villains, and juxtaposing those with the new costumed villains to create this sort of plethora of suspects.
Yes.
I think as well, because the killer is targeting the mob, I think you almost expect it to be someone from outside of that.
Yeah.
And obviously the big emphasis throughout the comic is the suspicion of Harvey Dent.
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of Harvey Dent then, What do you make of his role in this comic book?
I mean, you can get through half this book, and it's not necessarily a Two-Face origin. It's only the last 6 issues, 7 issues, that you then realise that it's a Two-Face origin.
They kind of do the same thing in the film, is that it's only the last third or so that, he becomes the villain. But they do the same thing in the comic book, where they cast him in half shadow and they show this darker side to him, this violent side to him. By issue 10, he's almost constantly shown in half shadow, this darkness growing inside him. And then it's only the last, I think it's issue 11 or so, that he gets acid scarred in court.
Well, yeah, to me, that is the classic Two-Face origin. That is something that I was expecting. We do see that in Batman Forever with Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh, yeah, it's sort of on the news report, isn't it?
It's a very quick glimpse, but yeah, so I was expecting this to happen. I actually thought, I think it's in issue 1, when Harvey's house blows up. I expected that to be this story's Two-Face origin. So I thought he'd come out of the house on fire and it's half his face burnt, that sort of thing. I was very surprised and pleased that they went down the route of the acid.
Yeah, it's a lot more of a slow burn. Rather than getting out of the way early and then having Two-Face as a villain, they spend 10 issues building up to him. Although I would say, have you ever watched Arrested Development?
No.
Okay, well, the doctor in this issue 11, he comes into the room and says, "Your husband is gone." And she starts breaking down in tears. And then he goes, "Oh, no. I mean, he's escaped. He's gone."
I know the exact page you're talking about. And I actually had a little laugh.
It's like the worst doctor ever.
I've lost your husband.
So yeah, so obviously the culmination of it is the transition of a character who was, first of all, good, but also relatively grounded into this colourful costume freak with all of the others. There's an iconic shot at the end, which is the sort of 9 different supervillains grouped together in Carmine Falcone's office.
Yeah, it's almost like a sort of screenshot when you've got this panel of just all of them together.
Even Catwoman, who's not really a supervillain at that point, they just kind of wanted to draw her in that scene, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the first appearance of Peter Penguin in this book.
I can't even remember being in that scene, but yeah, I think you might be right. He's just sort of...
He's just there. There's no reference to him, as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
He just appears with the other ones. I have got a question for you.
Yeah?
How strong would you say Batman is? Because in chapter 7, or issue 7, he literally rips off the prison bars of the window just with his bare hands.
Yeah, there's a certain stylistic aspect with this, with some of the feats that they do. The characters fall from great heights and stuff like this. There's a very comic book logic to things. This is, again, where comics differentiate from films in a certain aspect, is that they don't necessarily have to follow the same rules.
One final point to make on the artwork in this, and the storyline and how they flow together. In chapter 8, when Bruce is talking to Alfred.
Yeah, actually, no, there's a really nice sort of father-son relationship in that scene. And I think actually that carries over pretty well into the films.
Yeah, I mean, in the books, Tim Sale draws Bruce sitting on the stairs in a very similar way to when Bruce was a child, and he would sit on the stairs and hear his dad talk about work and stuff.
Yeah, it's a nice little throwback, that, yeah. So the ending is left open to interpretation a little bit about the killers. It establishes that there are definitely 2 killers, but there is still some dispute. I had a quick look online about whether or not Harvey Dent was also one of the holiday killers.
But you're saying there was 3 killers?
Possibly. I don't know if that was your interpretation of the ending. It's certainly one that exists online. But yeah, what was your interpretation of the ending then? Did you think that there were just 2? Do you think there were more?
I honestly thought there was 1.
Okay.
And if someone had torn out the last 4 pages of this book and I didn't realise, I would have been quite happy. I was quite taken back with the last couple of pages where you find out there's a second, which, I mean, I know we have put a spoiler up top, but I don't really want to spoil who the second one is.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I mean, it's already enough to say that there are 2 killers. We don't have to say who it is as well, but...
Yeah, it's kind of like when someone tells you, "Oh, have you seen that film? It's got a really good twist."
Yeah, although we've kind of already done that. I mean, my interpretation of that ending is that there were the 2 stated, and that Harvey Dent only really becomes a villain after the acid.
Yeah, you can see that he's toiling between his anger and the right thing to do. I think the acid in the face is the straw on the camel's back.
Definitely. Yeah, he was already under this pressure, and that was just it. So the subject of supervillains then, I suppose we should touch on Joker's role in this because he plays such a major role in the film. So he only appears for a couple of issues. He's in the Christmas one and then he pops up a bit later. But in this, he's actively trying to stop Holiday, which I find interesting. He doesn't like the fact that someone is taking his thunder almost and being a supervillain where he is.
Whereas he's almost like a spoiled child.
Yeah, whereas in the film, his MO is almost the complete opposite. He is creating a supervillain. He is creating another villain like him. Whereas in this, he doesn't like it. He's trying to stop it. So what are your thoughts on how Joker is used in this?
I do like that he's not the main villain in the book, and he is just used, as you said, a couple of issues. The film, he's almost like he's at the forefront.
Yeah, he takes that Holiday role, doesn't he?
He's there to, in my opinion, to establish that this is a world already created. He's got that history with Batman. This isn't the first interaction that Bruce, or Batman, and the Joker have had. And yeah, I do like that in the story, he's interwoven with all these other bad guys. But the heart of this is Holiday and Two-Face.
Yeah, and it's more of a detective story than a superhero story, which we don't really see in the film. The film, he does that little bit of detective work with the brick and the bullet.
Which, frankly, is bullshit. I'm sorry, but watching that angers me.
All right. Well, let's calm you down then by getting something that you do like. I tell you what it is. Easter eggs. Ian?
It's time for Easter eggs. I'm not yoking you.
That's your new intro, is it?
Yep.
Okay then. So this is the part of the show that is dedicated to Iain and his penchant for Easter eggs. So Iain, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I've only got a couple.
Oh no.
What a shame, I've only got two. So, at the start of the film, when we first see the Joker, and he's got his back to the camera, and he's waiting to get picked up.
Yeah.
You can see a film poster in the far distance. It's just to the left of him. It's quite blurry, but it's actually a poster for Spider-Man 3.
Okay. Was that just in shot or?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm not sure whether it was just that on that road they filmed in, there was a poster for it.
I assume it would have been. I can't imagine that's deliberate.
Yeah, it's quite blurry, but if you compare it to the poster that was released with Spider-Man 3, where Tobey Maguire has his little shirt pulled open and he's got his dark suit underneath.
Right.
It's literally the same poster.
Okay. The crossover we've been waiting for.
But yeah, the second one is when Lucius Fox is showing Wayne his new suit.
Right.
Wayne asks Fox how it will hold up against dogs. And Lucius says it should do fine against cats.
Right.
Which is obviously a reference to Catman, which Thomas Rhys Blake, who first appeared in the comics in 1963.
I actually really like Catman. I'm a big Secret Six fan, so Catman I'm a big fan of.
I mean, I can't think of any other cat character.
No.
I mean, let's stop being daft now. Obviously a reference to cat.
But is it? Or is it just a reference to cats?
I mean, the fact that she appears in the third film.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that it could be, but this seems like one of those Mr. Reese types things where people are digging a little bit into it too much.
You mean Thomas Rhys Blake?
I wish I was talking about Thomas Rhys Blake.
And one final point to end on. Not really an Easter egg, but the beginning half of season 4 of Gotham was very loosely adapted for The Long Halloween.
Oh, right, okay. I didn't get that far in Gotham, I'll be honest. The first 2 seasons?
It was something that I watched and then I thought, well, I'm already 2 seasons deep. I've got to see how this finishes. It does pick up. The last season's the best season.
Anyway, thank you very much for that, Iain. That was Ian's Egg Hunt, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time with some more factoids for you. Let's bring it back to the film and the comic, wrap things up. We've obviously talked about this. The Dark Knight is not a straight translation of The Long Halloween in the way that Scott Pilgrim was. So there's a lot of differences. But in terms of similarities, what were your thoughts there? What did you like with regards to what did translate from page to screen?
Oh, I mean, the relationship between Harvey, Bruce, and Jim. Really, really good. I think that's something that was pulled across to the film really well.
Yeah, and I think it helps that you've got three great actors, three great central performances there, and it establishes that each of those characters has their own motivation. Not only their own motivation, but also their own way of going about things. Even when they're on the same page, you've got three people who don't really trust each other, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. In particular, there's the roof scene.
Yes.
In the comics and the film, you've got all three characters talking. They're brought together to bring down different people. So you've got like Falcone in the comic, and then in the films, they come together to bring down Salvatore Maroni.
Yeah, and the sort of the mob in general. You know, you've got all those different, you've got the Chechen and, the Black Mafia and all the different groups, yeah.
But then there's a bit right at the end of that scene in both comic and film that they're talking to Batman and he's gone.
Yeah.
In the style of Batman. Yeah, and then Gordon says to Dent, he does that. Literally word from word in the comic and in the film. And that actually I did laugh in both versions.
Yeah, it's well executed. Actually, in terms of word-for-word translation from page to screen, there's the repeated phrase throughout the comic of "I believe in," and in the comic it's repeated as "I believe in Gotham City," "I believe in Gordon," and "I believe in Harvey Dent" being the final one. Whereas obviously in the film, that's his campaign slogan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the film, as you said, Bruce says that to him when he's talking about him at the gala, which, as I said, it's brought up several times in the comic, but it's actually, that is the very last line in the book. I mean, faking deaths isn't another similarity. In the comics, it's Dent. In the film, it's Gordon.
Mm-hmm. And in both of those scenes, actually, they had a character dressed as a member of a SWAT team. So in the film, it's Gordon dressed as a SWAT member, and in the book, it's Batman dressed as him.
And just talking about Harvey there as well, I mean, in both versions, he's got his coin, his lucky coin, which is from his dad. In the film, it makes it very obvious that it's a two-headed coin.
Yeah.
I don't think that in the comic it mentions that it's two-headed.
I don't think it does.
I never really thought about it being a two-headed coin. It might have been mentioned in Batman Forever, I don't know. But I never really realised it was a two-headed coin. And to me, it's something like, oh, okay, that coin has two heads or two faces. A little wink towards the character.
What?
Dun, dun, dun. And then one sort of final similarity between the comics and the films is how the Joker sets all of that money on fire, similar to how Harvey and Batman set the money on fire.
Yeah. There's definitely the kind of thing that we saw with X-Men, where you have, visual references that are not necessarily, the same context, but they take a scene that happens in the comic and they transpose it into the film, even if it's under completely different circumstances.
So, regarding the film and the comic, I mean, A, would you recommend the film and book?
Yeah.
And also B, what order would you advise people to read and or watch?
Okay, yeah, well, that's kind of an interesting one, because actually part of the reason I wanted to do these two episodes back to back is Scott Pilgrim, although it's not a one-for-one translation, is very faithful. This is more an inspired by. And both of them are very good. So yeah, I'd absolutely say go ahead, read both. You will get a different experience reading completely different storylines. And, I struggle to think anyone listening to this has not seen The Dark Knight already. So yeah, if you've already watched it, go ahead, read The Long Halloween and read The Killing Joke while you're there.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone who's just watched this film and not either of the bookends.
Yeah, absolutely. Watch the film, read the comic, and because they're distinct enough from each other, I think you can do it in either order. Actually, let's put that on to you. So you were reading this for the first time. So what were your first impressions?
It made me appreciate the film more.
Okay.
It's nice to get the other version of Harvey Dent. I mean, I know the film's primarily based on the Joker, but you get that history in the background of Harvey Dent in the comics, and I think that it makes me appreciate the storyline used or the plot created in the film more.
Yeah, I actually completely understand where you're coming from that. Because of Heath Ledger's performance and the circumstances surrounding it, the character of Harvey Dent gets overshadowed. Whereas the comic book, because you have a mystery villain, it can focus on those central characters of Batman and Gordon and Harvey Dent so much more. So, yeah, so generally you liked it?
Yeah, I like the film and the comic. As I said, it's first time that I've actually watched the film without watching all three of them, or at least watching Batman Begins and then this.
And just to be sure, you read the comic, then rewatched the film.
Yes.
So that puts that into that different context, as you.
Yeah, I do try to read the comics first and then watch the film.
So, I mean, I think we've spoken enough about that. So, any other business?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Okay.
And a fun fact.
Okay.
So, who would you say is the best on-screen adaptation of Two-Face? And I have some options. So, you've got Aaron Eckhart in The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
You've got Tommy Jones from Batman Forever. You've got Billy Dee Williams.
Yeah, Billy D.
From Batman 89.
Yep.
You've also got him again in the Lego Batman movie. Or Two-Face in the Batman animated series.
I mean, you know I'm a massive Star Wars fan, so it's got to be Billy D.
Which version? 89 or the Lego Batman?
It's the same version. I think whenever you translate something into a TV format, you're always going to have more time to build on that character, develop them. So I do have a real soft spot for the cartoon. But yeah, I mean, you can't beat Billy Dee Williams. He's the coolest man in the world. I had no idea what you were doing for half of that.
And my fun fact, which I hope you'll find fun.
I do too.
So, for the 60s Batman TV show, they actually cast Two-Face, but the episode wasn't filmed due to the show being cancelled. Do you know who they cast?
I don't, and this is quite a fun fact. Carry on.
Clint Eastwood.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good fun fact. I enjoy that.
Yes.
So, shall we move on to Ask the Teapot?
Ask the Teapot.
That's the catchphrase. So, this is the segment of the show where we answer some listeners' questions. And unlike last week, we actually have some, which is nice.
Ooh.
I know, moving up in the world. So, first order of business is actually a correction. Last week, I answered the question from Mr. I about Stevie Hunter's Saab Turbo, which was, whatever happened to Stevie Hunter's Saab Turbo? I realised I didn't answer that question. I just said what make and model it was and what was the licence plate.
You're fired.
I'm sorry. So, I mean, the answer is it was crashed. They crashed it, it blew up, and it never got sold again. So, there we go. That's what happened to the car, and honest to God now, it will never feature again in this show, I promise you.
And that wraps up Ask the Teapot.
Yeah, I realise we focused more of our show around Stevie Hunter's Saab Turbo than we probably intended to when we set out to do this. But it's information people need to know.
I mean, I was a keen advocate of calling the show Become Stevie Hunter's Turb Sabo. No. Become the Saab Turbo?
Sure, why not?
Moving on.
But no, we actually have some questions this week. And our first question, actually, we've got first of two questions from James in Cambridge. So James asks, what is with the sudden resurgence of Archie comic adaptations, and is it because of Cole Sprouse? So, Iain, what are your thoughts?
I mean, Cole Sprouse has made a reoccurrence in the last few years, and I'm wondering how long I can talk about this without anyone realising I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Not long, apparently. So Archie Comics, you know what Archie Comics are?
Yeah.
Okay. Because they've not really made a splash over this side of the pond, have they? I mean, I don't know anyone who really reads that.
No, the only thing that I know over here is the Archie TV show. It's not called Archie, it's called
Riverdale.
Thank you.
So I think this is what James is actually asking about, is Riverdale Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Yep.
And I think they did one Katie Keene as well. And these aren't the first series that have been based on Archie Comics. And Archie Comics are a big American comic book series, a sort of slice of life Americana comic books about 1950s teens. I think basically what's happened is Riverdale was fairly successful, so they've made spin-offs.
As far as I'm aware, they've made a couple of crossovers of I think Scooby-Doo maybe got involved.
Maybe. I don't know about that. I mean, this is the thing. In the TV world, it's not unusual for this to happen. You know, CW do it all the time. I think Riverdale is a CW show. When they made Arrow and that became a success, they then made The Flash and Supergirl. And, you know, they made a half a dozen other shows as well. And I'm sure the resurgence of Archie comic adaptations is just based on that. And as for Cole Sprouse, I don't actually know much about him, but I do know his brother Dylan. He owns a meadery and he plays D&D, so I think we'd be friends.
Wait, are we talking about the Sprouse twins?
Yeah.
The sweet life of Zack and Cody?
Yeah, that's Cole and Dylan Sprouse. They have really nice back and forth on social media. I don't know if you've seen any of that.
I've not, no, I don't follow those two.
Oh, they're always bickering. It's lovely.
But just while you've been talking there, I've done some live on the air research, and there has been crossovers, which is Archie versus the Predator, and also Archie meets the Punisher.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's move away from Archie. What's the next question?
So the second question from James is, he asks, are comic protagonists, superheroes, being overtly sexualized with attractive appearances or muscle definition to bring in a wide mainstream audience? And does this detract from the source material?
I mean, I'm not sure whether he's referring to male or females there. Maybe both. What makes me think about straight away is the crazy diet that a lot of actors have to go through. As soon as they're cast in these MCU roles, it's chicken, it's protein, it's milk, it's maybe not milk.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Chris Hemsworth's spoken about this in particular, hasn't he? The strains of keeping that sort of superhero physique. And that's obviously based on the comic book appearances. And I think actually he's talking about the source material. I think he's probably focusing on the comic book representations of these characters. I'm not massively qualified to talk about this. There are a huge amount of other publications, articles on the internet you can go look up. So I'll be brief, but I'll start by saying, there's nothing wrong with a bit of sexiness in comics. To use a reference Iain won't understand, what's wrong with being sexy? Iain, do you understand that?
Are you saying that I'm not sexy?
No, it's a Spinal Tap reference.
Damn you, Spinal Tap.
So yeah, basically, there's a difference between a sexy character who is sexy and has a sexual assertiveness to them, and over-sexualized representation of characters. It's the difference between Alan Davis's Excalibur, where it was basically one step away from being a sex romp, and it was all good fun, and Greg Land art, which is basically traced pornography. The point being that there's nothing inherently wrong with characters being presented as sexy. And ultimately, superhero comics are a mainstream front of comic books. In the way that James Bond or Mission Impossible, they focus on fit, attractive people. And it doesn't mean that other films aren't made. Comic books are a medium. They're not a genre. So there is as great a variety in comic books as there is in cinema. So you can go out and you can focus on just Marvel and DC comic books, which will, absolutely focus on the lives of fit and attractive people doing superheroics. You can also go and pick up a huge amount of independent comics that will focus on all other body types and all other types of people. As to whether or not this is a detriment to the industry as a whole, I think often the mainstream stuff, as with superhero films in the cinema, the mainstream stuff allows the independent stuff to be made. It's the stuff that makes the money that allows them to endorse independent artists, writers, and creative efforts. But then, as I said at the beginning, I'm by no means an expert on these things, and if this is a subject that is of interest to you, I suggest you go out and have a look on the internet. There are people far more qualified to talk about this than I am.
So, do we have a question that's not from James?
Yeah, we do actually. Our last question of the day, it comes from Luke from Nottingham, who asks, why didn't you start with X-Men Origins Wolverine? Do you hate high art? I've got an answer for this. What about you?
Well, I personally wouldn't call X-Men Origins Wolverine high art.
Would you say it transcends that?
I don't know.
So all I'll say is we did not want to peak too early, but rest assured we have plans to cover that somewhere down the line. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for your questions, and do remember to send them in for next episode. If you're wondering what to read next, then the good news is that there is a follow-up to this from the same creative team, Batman Dark Victory, which in my opinion is not quite as good, but still a very worthy read. You could also try Jeph Loeb's other Batman works, such as Batman Hush or Catwoman When in Rome. Alternatively, if you want to learn more about the early days of the Dark Knight, then there's the excellent Batman Year One. We'll no doubt be doing an episode about that in the future. If you want to tell us your thoughts on today's episode, or have a question for Ask the Teapot, or maybe you just want to tell us how great you think we're doing, you can do so by emailing us at becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweeting us at becometheteapod. So, what comes after Halloween? Well, if you're from the UK like we are, then it's Guy Fawkes Night, which seems like the perfect time for us to voraciously verbalise our varying viewpoints in our velvety vernacular as we get very vocal about V for Vendetta.
Bye, everybody.
Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Iain.
And I'm Batman.